afternoon or morning, or depending on where we are in terms of time zones, etc. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us for the SPEC event, Pathways to Impact, a SPEC knowledge translation event. And I'll be one of your co-hosts. Blair and I will introduce ourselves in a bit, as well as the guest speakers will introduce as we go through. But I wanted to start off by welcoming Stephanie Bélanger from CIMVHR for our opening remarks.
With me. So, well, thank you, Sarah, and apologies for this delayed opening. So, yes, I'm Stephanie Bélanger. I'm the Associate Scientific Director at CIMVHR, at the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research. I'm also a veteran and a prof at RMC, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today. And it's nice to see, graduate and postdoctoral students gathered all here. So that's fantastic. But I would like to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on the traditional territory of Indigenous people. We express our gratitude for the opportunity to live and to learn on these lands. And we recognize that knowledge and teaching, as well as any type of learning in all their forms and across all traditions, are essential to the production of knowledge. Or should I say also the translation of knowledge? So the CIMVHR Student and Postdoctoral Engagement Community, or SPEC, was created with a very clear purpose to support the professional development of students, foster meaningful connections, and create a space where ideas can be shared openly, but also very constructively. So I really hope you enjoyed today's session and gain some insight into effective knowledge translation practices. It's so important for your career, but also for the health and well-being of the people we serve in research. So thank you so much for being part of SPEC, for contributing your time and expertise, because we do need your expertise. Being a student means having all great, beautiful, new ideas, and it's so important to us. And for the people that we serve, they really need that energy to heal and for their well-being. Also, don't forget that the CIMVHR forum call for abstract is still open. It closes the 14th of April. So it's in 2 weeks. You're able to make it, submit an abstract. That forum is a great tool for knowledge translation. So I hope that you'll be able to submit an abstract. And again, this year, we want to thank the Release Point Education and CIMVHR because it's a forum travel bursary. So maybe we could be able to help you to attend forum, which will be in Halifax this year. So please apply, submit papers. It's the only way to test the field and to meet all these people and share your knowledge. So it's a big network, and the SPEC network is also always growing, and we're very proud of it. Very, very happy with all the work that you do. So please enjoy this great, how can I say it, like a mini conference on knowledge translation. And I hope to see you very soon in October in Halifax.
Great. Thank you very much, Stephanie. Much appreciated. So for those welcoming words. And what we wanted to, before we do the introductions, we'll just talk about what the aim of this webinar was. And Blair and I are going to provide a little bit of background around why SPEC wanted to host this session. And so again, welcome all and thank you. And so what is the aim of this webinar? We hope to answer a number of questions, including sort of what is knowledge translation and why is it important? Is knowledge translation the same for all contexts, and how can you tailor your message to different audiences? What are the benefits of working in a team? How do you align knowledge translation to goals and edit ideas for impact? How do we bring together different voices to the table? And how do we evaluate the knowledge translation process? And so just moving ahead, as I said, the aim of the webinar, we have a number of things that we were hoping to answer in terms of questions, and really do appreciate Stephanie's sort of words around how this isn't just about knowledge production, but it's also about the knowledge translation piece, and that's really powerful as we sort of start on this webinar. And so the way the webinar will be run, we have we'll do some introductions, very brief, sort of interactive piece for the group here. Just we were curious about who was present. And then we have 3 guest speakers. And then we have a chunk of time set aside for questions that will run at the end. And so if you have questions, feel free you can put them in the chat. We'll try to monitor them, and then we'll sort of collate them. If there's one very specific to a speaker, you can bring that up in the chunk of time afterwards. But we are scheduled to run till so it'll 13:30 rather, so 1:30 Toronto time, and then if you're in sort of adjust accordingly for time zones. But yeah, so we've got about an hour and a half total for this webinar, and it is being recorded and will be available through the CIMVHR channel, as most of the SPEC events are. Okay, so we will forge ahead. So my introduction, my name is Sarah Salvis, and I work as the Paramedic Services Chief for the District of Temiskaming Social Services Administration Board. We are a small paramedic service covering more than 13,000 square kilometers in Northern Ontario. I have a master's in global healthcare leadership from the University of Oxford, and it was during that journey that I got involved with SPEC. It's a great community. I'm a support member with the board, and actually coming to the end of my 2-year term. And through that time on my master's, I did a dissertation that was titled "The Space Between: Barriers and Facilitators to Implementing Workplace Health and Wellbeing Programs for Paramedics, a Scoping Review." So anyone who knows that you often have word limits for when you're submitting content for whatever it might be, an abstract or something, you sometimes pray that the title isn't included in the word count, because I certainly was not brief there. But I will pass it over to Blair to introduce himself.
Hello, I'm a veteran autistic with PTSD, as well as a current master's student at Carleton University, specialized in international affairs. However, I wear many hats. I do a lot of charitable work on the side, as well as research in autism and PTSD, as well as AI. As a result, I have to wear many different hats, so to speak, and simultaneously try to research from policy to working with politicians to service providers all at once. As a result, you have to be very adaptable and quick thinking in regards to your knowledge translation, as a policy paper might work for one group, may not translate to the other, and also applying the correct research data to the problem you're looking at, even if the problem is the same, may be useful, as well as how you translate those different variables is critical, especially for getting the audience you want. The paper shown on screen is one of my earlier publications that shows how I got into the AI field as well. And because I work with AI and I'm an artsman, I have to learn how to talk to scientists and vice versa when there are these situations, where from a policy to like programming and et cetera. And that nuance between engineering and policies where I struggle with knowledge transition, as it goes from what is the theory to what is possible, and then also how does somebody outside those two metrics use it, is critical in regards to making policies and implementation successful. Thank you.
Great, thank you for both introducing yourself, Blair, and also sort of answering that question around why we wanted to host this webinar. And as SPEC was planning out our events last year, we were looking ahead in the calendar into this year, and the idea of knowledge translation came up for very personal reasons for myself, as I was finishing off my dissertation and sort of deciding on what next, and navigating this space around how, when I started my dissertation and started the master's, I was in a very different role. And now I'm in a place where I'm a senior leader in an organization trying to be an evidence-informed leader. However, I do not have time to run a scoping review every time I have to make a decision. And so what does that mean? And trying to navigate, how do I find research if I'm not attached to an institution? What does that mean? Or an academic institution, what does that mean, et cetera. And so the picture that I've included there is from a previous knowledge translation opportunity that I participated in, and there was a group of us from my former workplace, and it was under actually the assistance of Dr. Justin Maz, who's on this call. And we presented a number of items of research to a leadership conference, and it's really an interesting experience, sort of navigating that. And then when I was finished up my dissertation and sort of deciding, okay, well, I'm in a leadership role now. Do I pursue publishing that? Do I have time to translate that into a publishing space, or do I present it at conferences? What do I do with it? Or do I let it collect dust on my shelf at home? So it's an interesting sort of place to navigate, and I acknowledge that, all of you will have different answers to the question around what is it that you need to do to achieve knowledge translation and impact and whatnot. And I think we have 3 great representatives from different institutions, different spaces, who can sort of speak to some of these things around knowledge translation and impact and navigating this space. So thank you all for joining us, and look forward to the discussion afterwards. And certainly if there's anything that we can help beyond this space, then happy to do so. And it's been a great opportunity to work with Blair on this, because we bring very different perspectives to the work, not only from a space between PSP, my background, his background from the military and defense space, but then also, academia versus a decision maker, and then how do you sort of operate in those different places. And so we look forward to sort of, if we can, help answer questions along with the guest speakers at the session, sort of at the end of the session. I do see that there is one hand up. Oh, okay. I was going to say no, you're good. Because I'll be monitoring 2 screens, as is fairly typical. And if anybody needs to, you can sort of just chime in or add the question into the chat, and we can make sure to respond to it. So this is just a brief interactive component, and it would just require everybody to scan their QR code and answer accordingly. I will also copy the link and put it in the chat for everyone if you're having trouble, and hopefully it works. I tried it out this morning, but it doesn't mean that. And so we're just interested in knowing, what's your role? So are you a researcher, a student? Are you a representative of infrastructure such as CIMVHR or CIPSRT or Atlas or university admin? And then Blair and I had a great little discussion about how to describe different representative populations, because I was curious if people are in leadership or if they're a direct practitioner, and we sort of would say, a frontline or a staff member, but then we know that sometimes people wear different hats. But sort of, what's your main kind of role? I also appreciate that can be a squishy question. So, and then you just hit submit once you've and hopefully we will start to see some answers, assuming that my internet is fast enough. Whoops. Is it running? Response has been submitted.
The form does work. It's just not refreshing because mine said it was submitted successfully.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see. The joys of technology. Well, there we go. Okay. So we have, looks like a fair number of students, and then a fair number of researchers, and then some representatives from different, from the infrastructure, so CIMVHR, CIPSRT, Atlas, etc., and then a bit of a mix there. We've got a fair number of public safety personnel representatives this morning, so that's fantastic. And then a mix of other sort of research target / professions, and with some people who are interdisciplinary, which is interesting then in terms of how you tailor your approaches. And then, yeah, a lot of people are familiar with knowledge translation, which is fantastic. So hopefully this is then building on your knowledge. Our original plan was really just a bit of a teaser, and then we can continue to build on it, maybe help answer some questions, etc., and then get you interested in more. And then we have, so a good mix. So it looks like a lot of people have sort of said presentations or what knowledge translation that you've used previously or that you've considered, and then other things such as partnering with organizations, language summaries, recommendations, policies, excellent, videos, infographics for sure. It's interesting in terms of how we translate things into visuals and creative avenues for knowledge translation. All right, excellent. So thank you very much for participating in our brief little interactive session there, and we will forge ahead. So on to our first speaker with we've got a guest in the room with her. So would like to welcome Kara Kane with over 15 years of experience in the mental health and substance use sector. Kara is committed to strengthening the bridge between research, lived expertise, and real-world impact as the acting director of knowledge mobilization at the Atlas Institute for Veterans and Families. Her work focuses on moving research evidence and lived experience into practical psychoeducation resources and influencing practice and policy to support better mental health outcomes for veterans and their families. So thank you for joining us. I will mute, and then you should be able to take over the screen share. We've got some clapping, welcoming.
Thank you, everybody, for welcoming me here. I'm very excited to join you all today. I'm just gonna share my screen and apologies for my very cute but very obnoxious friend here who kept pawing at me during the introduction. So maybe if I just hold him tight, he'll settle. All right, share my screen. All right, everyone should be able to see. Yeah, I'm seeing nods. Great. I love when that works the first try. So thank you for welcoming me. As Sarah said, my name is Kara Kane, and I'm the Acting Director of Knowledge Mobilization at the Atlas Institute. And my presentation today is going to be focusing on how we amplify the impact of research by engaging knowledge users. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge, even in the room today, there are veterans and family members here. Want to acknowledge the service and sacrifices of all Canadian Armed Forces veterans and former serving Royal Canadian Mounted Police members, as well as their families. I also know I saw there's a lot of public safety personnel in the room. So although Atlas doesn't directly serve PSP, I would like to acknowledge the service and sacrifices that PSP and their families also make to keep our community safe. So the courage and commitment of veterans has protected our nation as well as countless others around the world. And thank you. I would also like to acknowledge that the Atlas Institute is a national organization, and we have staff across Canada, but our home office is located at the Royal Ottawa Mental Health Care Centre, so in Ottawa, which is on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. So some of you may be familiar with the Atlas Institute, but for those who aren't, I'm just going to briefly talk a little bit about who we are and why we exist. So we are a national health intermediary organization, and we work together to strengthen mental health services by addressing research and practice gaps. So we are funded fully by Veterans Affairs Canada. And Atlas is part of a broader ecosystem working alongside organizations like CIMVHR and CIPSRT, and we work in distinct but complementary ways. So for example, CIMVHR's focus is on research in the military and veteran health space, whereas Atlas is focused specifically in mental health of veterans and their families, and that is inclusive of both CAF and RCMP veterans. We do research, CAMB implementation, as well as the convening of interest holders and policy influence. And then our friends over at CIPSRT are focused on the public safety personnel and families, so including active RCMP. So while we focus on RCMP, once they've left the force, the CIPSRT would focus more on when they're still serving. So this is a much simplified explanation, but I just wanted to give some insight on how we all work closely together to make sure that our efforts are aligned and that we're not duplicating our work. So I touched briefly on this. So everything we do here at Atlas is in service of CAF and RCMP veterans and their families, and keeping in mind that they are the people intended to benefit from our work. So we do this through developing resources to educate and inform. So we want information to be relevant and accessible and useful to veterans and their families and to those who support them. We coach and train service providers who work with veterans and families. We offer free training on evidence-based treatments and work to increase their understanding and military and cultural competencies. So they're really building their understanding and knowledge of military and RCMP culture and context so they can be aware of adaptations that they might need to make in their work and be more familiar with the population's unique needs. We bring together interest holders from across the country and internationally to share knowledge and advance trauma-informed practices. Our goal is to help break down silos and create more connections between veterans, families, service providers, researchers, and policymakers. We conduct as well as fund research in areas that are important to veterans and families. So we have in-house research teams, but then we also do 3 RFPs every year. If anyone's interested, keep an eye out. In September is usually when they launch. And those topic areas are directly informed by the community. And we provide expert opinions and insights on veteran and families' mental health in the form of policy briefs and through consultations with policymakers to influence policy and make sure that they're grounded in evidence as well as community needs. So Atlas prioritizes CAMB as a core function of our work. We have a dedicated knowledge mobilization team, and we have a strategy that guides our work, and there's 4 goals within the strategy. So they each have clear objectives and guiding principles. And the work that I'm going to speak primarily about today will be about how we engage knowledge users in the development of psychoeducational resources. So in other words, we curate and disseminate high quality, evidence-informed and relevant knowledge products that we often co-develop with the community that are really tailored to their unique experiences and needs. All right, so if there is anything that you take with you after today's presentation, I hope that it is that good knowledge translation is a team sport. So historically, many of us were trained to think that if we produce high quality research, that the impact will follow. But in reality, great research that isn't used doesn't change anything. So the question becomes, how do we make sure our work actually reaches and helps the people it is intended to serve? So that is why engaging knowledge users becomes essential, not optional. So when I refer to knowledge users, that could be anyone who might use your research. So it could be veterans, it could be families, it could be service providers, policymakers, program developers, community organizations. And traditionally, they showed up at the end of the research. So the research would happen and then we would do knowledge translation. Whereas we're really focused on how do we integrate knowledge users in through the whole process and bringing them in as partners. Many of you will be aware of this, but why would we engage knowledge users? What are the benefits? So it ensures that the work that you're doing addresses an actual need from the community and is developed in a way that will be meaningful for the community that it's meant for. It also increases community buy-in from the beginning. So if you're engaging knowledge users from the get-go and they're involved and have ownership in it, it's going to be more meaningful. And the collaboration is going to be more thoughtful and avoid tokenism. That's certainly not what we want to do when we're engaging knowledge users, particularly people with lived experience. So people in the intended audience may be more likely to pick up your resources if it's clear that it was informed by the community and that they had input into the resources. So, or the research. Input from people with lived experience throughout the project lifecycle can also increase the relevance and usability of knowledge products. So knowledge users help you really understand what information and language will resonate most with them. And then your knowledge products can be better used by the people they're intended for. It also creates bi-directional learning opportunities. So it increases knowledge, skills, and capabilities of the project team as they learn from those who are engaging and vice versa. And in the work that we do, we've learned that participants can find healing. While that's not necessarily an intended outcome, and it's not an outcome that we've measured yet, although we are interested in doing it, it's certainly something that we hear quite often anecdotally from the people that we're engaging. So in sharing their stories, there's a sense of being seen and heard and having an impact on the community that means so much to them. I've got a quote here from one of our projects. It is meaningful to me that we collectively took our lived experience in its pain and trauma and discomfort and turned it into valuable, useful, and practical resources for others living through similar experiences. I feel like we've created support, hope, and the light at the end of the tunnel for those needing it. So that demonstrates the real world kind of impact of engaging people with lived experience in your work. So what does it look like? So a few considerations. So consider who is on your team. So this could include people with lived experience, service providers, policymakers. So engage these folks as key partners in your work. You can work with them to co-design the research question, interpret findings together, co-create outputs. The more that you are able to engage the key knowledge users, the more impact your work is likely to have. In working with knowledge users, it's also important to be flexible. So your original plan might change. I know we've certainly encountered that. But that's also where the value is. So we want to prioritize doing what's right versus what's quick. And in our experience, building in time for flexibility and that time to really engage with people and work through what might seem as contradictory feedback can really help us tailor the work. And it's important, it's not always possible, but having that kind of support from your organization leadership, because there will be curveballs that come your way. Protect resources. So engagement, authentic engagement, it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes ongoing commitment. We also want to engage early, frequently, and consistently. So engaging early helps build buy-in rather than bringing people in too late, which risks you finding out that you really weren't on the right track. Engaging frequently helps keep momentum on the projects and avoids drop-off. And there really is no one-size-fits-all approach. There are so many amazing tools and resources out there, though. So what works well for one knowledge user group might not work well for another. So you might need to test out different strategies and engagement tools to really find out what's going to work best for the community you're engaging in. So I'm going to share a few examples of co-creation projects that we've done here at Atlas. The first one is mindkit.ca. So this is in 2021. We had conducted a gap analysis to identify and prioritize different research and knowledge needs from the community. And they identified a need for more knowledge that is accessible in plain language, for families, and youth came up as a priority group as well. So we knew that there were very few resources specific for children and youth in particular, of who are family members of those suffering from a post-traumatic stress injury. And so we aim to create informative, engaging, and accessible information for young veteran family members about mental health. So the process that we took of co-creating this resource, which would ultimately be known as MindKit in the end, involved a number of steps. So to start off the project, we consulted with clinical subject matter experts who helped us develop an outline of potential topic areas. This outline helped us understand the scope of work, but it was evergreen, meaning that we were open to changing it and updating it based on what we heard from the knowledge users, so from the youth. Once there was a potential list of topics to start off, we pulled together an advisory committee that was comprised of 6 youth between the ages of 16 and 30, majority being children of veterans. These advisors were recruited through our Atlas networks. And we also hired a design vendor to help kind of bring the vision to life. Together, we worked with the advisory committee over 10 months and held regular virtual meetings over Zoom to guide all aspects of the work. So that included developing and finalizing content, deciding on which formats they wanted for the knowledge products, the look and feel, the colors, the animation style. We held group discussions. We used Jamboard at the time, which doesn't exist, but there's lots of great virtual collaboration tools. One we use often now is Mural. And at each stage, we worked with the advisory committee to prioritize, compile, and integrate feedback, and we used consensus-based decision-making. So this is what some of the final products look like that we developed together. So all of these are available for free on mindkit.ca. They created over 60 resources in English and French, so that included a website, both clickable and static graphics, written resources, audio clips, and a comic. So you can use the QR code here if you're interested in checking any of them out. And some of the outcomes and impacts. So these were launched in June 2023. They've been downloaded over 3,000 times from the web, and the website and the content has been viewed over 50,000 times. We've distributed over 5,000 hard copies of the resources, so that includes the comic and fact sheets, as well as journals, through different events, conferences, as well as mailing directly to groups who work with you. So one of them, groups using our materials is the Military Family Resource Centers and Wounded Warriors Kids Camp. We've received a lot of positive feedback from the community on the way that the resources have been received by youth, as well as adults working with youth. Another example of a project that we worked on was for the development of intimate partner violence resources. So this suite of resources was really improved on, or focused on improving the awareness, knowledge, and capacity surrounding intimate partner violence within veteran families. So it included animated videos, a service directory, and some practical guides, which include things like addressing common myths and realities of intimate partner violence within this population, the impacts, practical tips, and strategies to support oneself, recognizing unhealthy relationship dynamics, and also supporting children. So this project also used a co-design approach. So it brought together lived and learned expertise. So both people who had been impacted by intimate partner violence within the military and veteran community, as well as service providers and researchers with expertise in this area. So similar process here. So we engaged with some experts and assembled an advisory committee. We always try to cast a fairly wide net to ensure that we're getting diverse voices in our advisory committees and that we're not always hearing from the same people all the time. While people have many varied experiences, we know that this community is not a monolith. There are many, many varied experiences and identities within the veteran and family community. So As I said, this group included family members, veterans, service providers, as well as subject matter experts. And then over the course of 9 months, the team met regularly to co-develop these resources. So speaking more broadly to KT, and again, it sounds like most folks in the room do have experience with KT, but there are some key steps. There's a lot of great resources and tools out there, but they will, for the most part, follow these same steps. So the first thing that you need to do is to identify your desired impact. So what is the impact of the research that you're looking for? What are you trying to do with it? And then from that, you can identify the different knowledge users and different champions, and identify key messages. And then you want to tailor the key messages to those key audiences. So one manuscript may have a set of key messages that you would then tailor for many different audiences. So you can develop a variety of knowledge products from one manuscript. And then identify KT strategies. This is something that people often do first. So we come together and everybody gets really excited and people are like, let's make a movie or let's do this. But without first understanding what the desired impacts are and who the audience is, you can't really figure out what the best KT strategy is. So really encourage people to go through these steps first and then identify the best KT strategies after you've figured out what you're trying to do and who you're trying to impact. And then evaluation is also a key part. Pull together, as I said, there's tons of great resources and tools that are available for free. So I've listed just a few that we like. So there's the Sick Kids Knowledge Translation Planning Template. CIHR also has a guide to integrated knowledge translation, as well as a patient engagement framework. And then Research Impact Canada has a ton of great resources on their website. They also host a knowledge mobilization conference every 2 years. I think the next one's coming up this July. And they've got webinars, tools, lots of great free resources available on their website. So you don't have to do it alone. There are so many great resources and people out there that are keen to support and help. So if there is one thing I would leave with you, it's that for your research to have impact, you don't want to wait till the end to engage knowledge users. So think about who the research is for and bring those people into the process as early as you can and work with them and let them shape what you create. And what you create together will be so much stronger. Thank you very much. But yeah, I'll turn it back over to you, Sarah, and look forward to questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Kara. That's fantastic. Excellent. Lots of great points. I took notes. So I love that idea. You spoke about bi-directional learning opportunities, and I think that's so powerful around sort of the power of a team and how you can oops, that didn't share. So yeah, just that how you can be stronger together, I think is sort of how you finish it off there. And so I think that's really powerful. So thank you. And there will be opportunity for questions afterwards. So we'll move on to, I'll introduce Kara Vincent and Kara Kane will be sticking around. And believe me, isn't it interesting that we ended up with two Karas we already spoke about that before everybody else was signed into the meeting this morning. So yeah, so Kara Vincent is a knowledge translation specialist with the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment, so CIPSRT at the University of Regina, where she leads the development of evidence-based tools and resources for first responders and other public safety personnel, their leadership, and their families. Her professional background also includes academic / managerial editing and university-based communications. She has completed a Bachelor of Arts and a Master's of Arts from Wilfrid Laurier University and was formerly a doctoral candidate in the Faculty of Social Sciences at McMaster University. So, Kara, I will pass it on to you. Thank you. And I will stop sharing and you'll be able to share your screen.
Hey, thank you, Sarah. 1 second here. Make sure I'm sharing the right thing. Okay, how's that?
Yep, looks good. And just maybe a little bit on the volume, up a bit, but otherwise we're good. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Sarah and Blair, for organizing this event today and for inviting me to speak to this amazing SPEC community of practice. I think what you've built here with this community is really quite unique and amazing. So congratulations on that. So yes, my name is Kara Vincent. I work with the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment. Just a little bit about CIPSRT. CIPSRT works to mobilize evidence-based mental health and well-being resources for public safety personnel, including firefighters, paramedics, police, border services officers, correctional officers, correctional workers, search and rescue personnel, and numerous persons who support all PSP operations. There are important public safety personnel who often work out of sight. For example, public safety communicators and operational intelligence personnel. CIPSRT is based at the University of Regina, and CIPSRT and the University of Regina and its federated colleges are on Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 territories, the homelands of the Nahiawak, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota peoples, and the Michif Métis Nation. CIPSRT acknowledges the importance of the land we each reside upon. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in honoring relationships between nations. So obviously today we can only really scratch the surface of this huge sphere of knowledge mobilization, which I understand there is a lot of understanding around knowledge mobilization in our audience, but hopefully today equips you with some introductory ideas that you can take away and use. So when we think about research, we often focus on producing knowledge, designing studies, analyzing data, publishing findings, but it's clear that there's often a gap between producing knowledge and seeing it actually used. So knowledge mobilization is really about bridging that gap, thinking intentionally about how your work reaches people and makes an impact. Increasingly, these questions are becoming central to how research is evaluated and funded. So today we'll look at a few introductory ideas about knowledge mobilization as a way of thinking about how you can move your research beyond academia and have real-world impact. A couple of learning objectives. By the end of the session, I hope you will better understand global and tri-council shifts toward research impact, recognize key elements of effective knowledge mobilization, and explore how to align audience, messaging, and your knowledge mobilization goals. So why does knowledge mobilization matter? There are several important reasons. First of which, it helps maximize the impact of publicly funded research. If research is publicly funded, it's reasonable to expect that it should ultimately contribute to the public good. It supports evidence-informed policy and practice. So it helps ensure that all this wonderful research output that's being done is positioned in a way that it can actually inform real-world decision-making and problem-solving. It plays a role in addressing equity. Traditional academic outputs don't work for all audiences, and without intentional mobilization of research evidence, we may be excluding many audiences from being able to access and use knowledge and derive benefit from it. And finally, knowledge mobilization is important because it aligns us with a broader global shift towards recognizing and valuing a wider range of research impacts. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this. All this to say, knowledge mobilization is here to stay. So what does that mean for you as graduate students and early career researchers? It means that knowledge mobilization is probably no longer something optional or a nice to have. It's increasingly becoming a core expectation or a core competency within evidence-based research. So in what ways are we kind of seeing this progression? Well, we see this reflected across Tri-Council funding agencies in several ways. So Tri-Council being SSHRC, CIHR, and NSERC. So for example, CIHR recently released a national knowledge mobilization framework and action plan, which explicitly positions knowledge mobilization as central to research impact and health system improvement. At the same time, funding and infrastructure are being developed to support this work, such as knowledge mobilization hubs in priority areas, including the one I'm involved in at CIPSRT, focused on post-traumatic stress injuries among public safety personnel. SSHRC also embeds knowledge mobilization directly into its merit review criteria. That's the criteria by which funding is awarded. We're also increasingly seeing knowledge mobilization infrastructure being built up within universities, such as the Knowledge Mobilization Hub at Simon Fraser University, the Knowledge Mobilization Unit at York University, and the Knowledge to Impact Hub at the University of Calgary, just to name a few institutional leaders in this. And when we look more broadly at more global trends, Canada's Tri-Council funding agencies are signatories to DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment. DORA is a global initiative with signatories in 166 countries, and I think 70 signatories within Canada. It calls for a shift away from traditional metrics of research assessment, so things like peer-reviewed journal metrics and citation counts, and encourages funding agencies, academic institutions, publishers, and researchers to recognize and value knowledge mobilization outputs as essential metrics of research impact and excellence. So I hope you're not, but you might be hearing this and thinking, okay, is this yet another skill, another competency I'm expected to take on and master on top of everything else? But my friends, I am here with a message of hope and encouragement for you, because knowledge mobilization is about aligning your work with why I suspect many of you got into research in the first place, to contribute something meaningful, to have an impact, and to make a real world difference. And within the sphere of military and public safety research, that purpose can seem especially clear. Your work connects directly to people facing real world challenges, in addition to their resiliencies and their strengths. So how knowledge is mobilized in this sphere can have very real implications for these populations. And in many cases, you're likely already doing so much of this work. You're creating partnerships, doing outreach, thinking about who could benefit from your research, and so on. Much of the work that used to be invisible or just expected is now a measure of research excellence. So that is actually a pretty great development. I'm also here to tell you that you're already better at this than you might think. If you've ever adapted how you explain your research, depending on who you're talking to, you're already doing knowledge mobilization. So think of the knowledge mobilization lens not in terms of doing more, but perhaps shifting to an approach that is a little bit more intentional and strategic. So what makes for effective mobilization? And I think Kara, number one, touched on this a little bit. It is being clear about your main message, being intentional about who you're trying to reach and why, having structure and a cohesive plan for your knowledge mobilization activities, thinking in a more comprehensive way. So at every stage of your execution, you're kind of thinking about goals, audiences, and trying to create alignment in order to deliver what people actually need from your work. And you're reflective. You're thinking about what it means to have succeeded in your goal. And there are elements of measurability of determining what worked and what didn't, kind of built into your process. So effective knowledge mobilization is not just about sharing knowledge, it's about ensuring it actually reaches people and is useful for them. So let's talk about core messaging to multiple audiences. So in this, we're trying to shift to a perspective that is very audience-centered, and different audiences need different takeaways. So you can ask yourself, who needs this information? Who would benefit from it? Why does it matter to them? And how can they act on it? Depending on the scope of your work, these audiences might include military members, veterans, families, public safety personnel, families, policymakers, practitioners, community groups, other researchers, the general public, or others. So, for example, a policymaker might want to know, what does this mean for policymaking or decision making? A clinician or a practitioner might ask, what does this mean for my work or my practice? And a member of the public might ask, why does this matter to me? A strong main message helps translate complex research into something clear and actionable in just a couple of sentences. Think elevator pitch. I reference Melanie Barwick throughout this presentation because she's the leading Canadian scholar and teacher of knowledge mobilization, and she's incredibly good at what she does. According to her, a main message should answer 3 whats. What? So what did you find? What was your key finding or insight? So what? What does it matter? What's the relevance? And now what? What action should be taken and by whom? Because it isn't enough that people understand your message, they need to also know what to do with it. Just to concretize this a little bit, let's look at an example of how audience-based messaging can be applied using the Moral Injury Guide for public safety personnel and leaders as our example. So just a super quick background, a growing body of evidence indicates that through the course of their work, public safety personnel are frequently exposed to potentially morally injurious events. These are experiences that may involve actions, inactions, or situations that conflict with a person's morals, ethics, or values. The Moral Injury Guide, published in 2025, is an evidence-based resource designed to support public safety personnel and leaders in understanding and responding to the mental health and well-being challenges associated with moral injury. So let's start with a general overarching main message from the Moral Injury Guide. Exposure to potentially morally injurious events can significantly impact the mental health of public safety personnel. PSP leaders and clinicians can all play a role in mitigating these impacts. The Moral Injury Guide offers evidence-based strategies to support this work. A few more audience messages. So a clinical audience. Moral injury can arise from exposure to potentially traumatic events and may impact the mental health of public safety personnel. The Moral Injury Guide provides evidence-based strategies clinicians can use to recognize and address moral injury in public safety personnel. For individual PSP, public safety personnel, moral injury results from trauma exposure and can significantly harm your mental health. The Moral Injury Guide offers evidence-based strategies to support you in understanding and managing these impacts. And for PSP leadership, moral injury can arise from exposure to potentially traumatic events and may impact the mental health of public safety personnel. The Moral Injury Guide provides evidence-based strategies leaders can use to support team well-being and mitigate these impacts. So by aligning audience and message, we have become a bit strategic, and now we can add another strategic dimension to this, which is your goal. So what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to raise awareness? Are you trying to support practice change? Are you trying to build capacity? Because your goal will inform the type of approach you choose. Thinking back to the example of the moral injury guide, many of these would be knowledge mobilization goals: awareness raising, informing decision making, practice change, capacity building, and more. Different goals call for different knowledge mobilization strategies in order to meet your audience where they're at. And this is where that piece Kara talked about comes into play. The strategy should meet the audience, not the other way around. So if your goal is awareness raising, maybe you're going to think about webinars, podcasts, social media, websites, or infographics. If your goal is capacity building, maybe you'll think about training manuals or modules or toolkits. If it's practice or policy change, maybe you'll consider knowledge briefs, decision support tools, or guidelines. And if your goal is engagement and co-learning, maybe you'll look to build partnerships, collaborations, or communities of practice. So effective knowledge mobilization is rarely a single output. A good tip is to consider layering your outputs. Consider releasing content in your knowledge products in different formats over time to help reinforce your message and extend the life of your work. A few other tips: look for opportune timing. If your goal is policy change, maybe there's a policy window opening up in a government funding cycle, for instance. Look for opportunities that are kind of primed for change. And build flexibility into your planning. Knowledge mobilization is an iterative process, so try to be as responsive as you can to what is and is not working at all stages of your outputs, and try to be prepared to change course if necessary. Not everything is going to land how you want it, and that's okay. That's why we assess, and that's why we build measurement, elements of measurability into our work. So in summary, at its core, knowledge mobilization is about aligning your audience, your message, your goal, and your approach. We're not just sharing knowledge, we're trying to direct what happens to it, who it reaches, how it's understood, and whether it's actually used. Again, the good news is that you're likely already doing so many aspects of knowledge mobilization. So just remember, the shift isn't about doing everything. It's about being more intentional and strategic with what you're already doing. And even small changes in how you think about audience, message, and goals can significantly increase the impact of your work. So here are a few knowledge mobilization resources you might find helpful, and I see Kara and I are very much on the same wavelength here. Research Impact Canada, or RIC, is a national network dedicated to maximizing research impact for public good. And their website has a great collection of free resources, including guides, tools, and learning modules. And if you are interested in a deeper dive and seeing how knowledge mobilization is applied in real world settings, I would highly recommend an 8-week course called Mobilize You, offered through Research Impact Canada. It's mostly asynchronous with one live session per week over 8 weeks. And if you're at a RIC member institution, there are a limited number of free spots available to Mobilize You. And if I'm not mistaken, registration for the 2026 course opens in about a couple weeks. So if you wanted to check whether your institution is a RIC member, you can look on the Research Impact Canada website and find out. The Hospital for Sick Children, affiliated with the University of Toronto, offers what I believe is Canada's only accredited certificate program in knowledge mobilization. It's a 1-week immersive program with online and in-person options. They also make, as Kara mentioned, a number of resources from the course available online for free, including a comprehensive planning template and evaluation tool. Another really good tool, the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario also offers the Leading Change Toolkit, which is a free online evidence-informed resource focusing on supporting the uptake and sustainability of evidence in practice. It really is an amazing resource, particularly if you want to learn more about knowledge mobilization frameworks, so the theories and methods by which people are commonly doing this work. So if this is something you're interested in delving into further, there are so many resources out there and accessible points of entry for you to investigate further. Some references from today's presentation. And I just want to thank you for your time today. I want to thank you for the wonderful work you're doing for a most deserving population. I want to wish you all good luck in your research careers and your knowledge mobilization endeavors. And I just know you're all going to do amazing things with both. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kara. Lots of applause happening. Ooh, and even one little, I think, horn is going there. So that's great. Thank you. Again, took lots of notes. Interesting, the alignment, that discussion around flexibility. And I loved the sort of the idea of how it's about not just sharing your information, but directing what happens next. So that's great. And depending on timing, again, we'll work on having an opportunity to have some questions come from the group, and hopefully we have a little bit of time for discussion. But so thank you very much for that talk. And on to our last speaker, Dr. Justin Maas is an advanced care paramedic and scientist in residence with Peel Regional Paramedic Services in Brampton, Ontario, and an adjunct faculty member in the Paramedicine Collaborative in the Department of Family and Community Medicine at the University of Toronto. Justin's research focuses on occupational health and well-being among paramedics. So on to Justin. I will stop sharing and then you should be able to share.
I'll give it a try.
There we go. Yeah. So thank you for joining us, Justin.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
There we go.
Success?
Success. Yeah. You're in full edit. There you go. Yeah. Great.
And now, like it's the actual slide. It's not the presenter version or the notes version.
You're the presenter version.
Cool. Well, thanks for the invitation. Happy to be here. It's an exciting topic. It's really cool. My name's Justin. People at work call me Dewey. I think this is going to be fun because Kara and Kara are both talking about knowledge mobilization, knowledge translation, the need to rethink this. I think I can offer a bit of a different perspective vis-a-vis my role in the paramedic service, which is as an embedded clinician researcher, mostly doing research on behalf of the paramedic service and trying to align that in some way with the service's strategic priorities and interests. And for the last, good Lord, several years, that's been on occupational health and well-being. So around violence prevention, around post-traumatic stress injuries, around mental health supports for the service. So we'll see if I can say something useful or insightful. My training going through research looked very much like what we've been talking about, the need to get away from, right? So the research process, starting with an idea, poking around the literature, teasing out a research question, designing a study, and gathering some data, and then getting funding, approvals, and building a team, doing your data collection, analyzing your data, and then getting to the end, that fun part where you're doing the knowledge translation. And mostly when we have said that in the past, like we've talked about, it's writing a paper or going to an awesome conference like CIMVHR, doing the fun, awkward thing where you stand beside your poster and see if people want to talk about what you think is super important and having it on screen. But for the last little while, like I know CIHR has been doing this, SHRC has been doing this as well, where they're starting to nudge guys like me, researchers like me, to think less about the knowledge at the end of the research process and trying to move some of these processes, some of these ideas a bit earlier in the research stack, right? Through integrated knowledge translation approaches or knowledge mobilization strategies, which are subtly different. And it matters. Like I would say it's important. And Gemini gave me a really kind of depressing reason why it's important. So I typed into Google, how often are scientific papers actually read? And here's what it's spat out. As many as 50% of academic papers are never read by anyone other than their authors, referees, and the journal editors. Furthermore, nothing good comes after a furthermore, friends. An estimated 90% of published papers are never cited. While scientists spend roughly 23% of their working time reading, the average paper is only read in depth by about 10 people. Uh, so that's fun, but it's good motivation for us to think about, what it is that we're doing, the why it is that we're doing this particular thing, and how we can better align these to solve real problems, address meaningful gaps, and be useful in ways that go beyond traditional academic publishing. Not to say that that's not unimportant. One of the things that makes science science, as you know, is that it's systematic, it's a disciplined inquiry, and it's meant to withstand the scrutiny of the scientific community. That's its bona fides. So some of these things still matter because peer review, such as it is a way to establish the legitimacy of the process that we've used to produce the knowledge. But we can and need to think differently about how that knowledge is generated and how we incorporate that into the research process naturally. So when I say knowledge translation, CIHR tells me I mean knowledge mobilization. The timing for this is amazing. As I understand it, this guide just came out this month, which I think is super exciting. And CIHR talks about knowledge mobilization as being distinct from knowledge translation because of the moving part, right? Taking the knowledge produced through the research process and incorporating into future research or policy, practice, the public sphere, with the goal of improving health, supporting more effective health services and products, and strengthening healthcare systems. They give a couple of examples, some of which we talked about today, through co-production, through incorporating knowledge users in the research process, through community-led participatory action approaches, and importantly, through indigenous-led solution-focused research into health and well-being. And because I work within the structure of the paramedic service, doing research for the paramedic service, it gives me kind of a unique perspective that has been tricky to learn, I think, at times, but is useful in considering this. So I think about people like Sarah, for example, who's an executive leader in a large and complex organization, has a lot of competing demands on her time and her attention. And she's got somebody like me, a researcher, coming to them and trying to be useful in some way. And I've realized over the years that research evidence is really just one of many, many, many different inputs that are going into Sarah's decision-making process and framework to make, operational decisions, tactical decisions, strategic policy development, developing new programs, and improving service delivery strategies. And as much as researchers like us might think that it's a really important input, it's one of, a dozen in many cases. And they're all weighted a little bit differently, and they're all weighted depending on depending on who you're speaking with. So there's a lot of competing things that are happening at Sarah's level. And it's really my job, or I think about my job as a worker bee in the organization, to be a capability through specific skills that I have to make this process of making strategic decisions for the paramedic service to improve service delivery. And this has been focusing on paramedic health and well-being easier, more robust, with good rigor behind it, such that this one input that I'm able to contribute into this really complex soup of factors that goes into decision making is going to be really dialed in. You say, yep, this is something that is trustworthy, it's robust, it's rigorous, you can take it to the bank, but also working really hard throughout the whole research process to ensure it's aligned. And this is what you start to see with learning health systems, the push for learning health systems in hospitals, in organizations that deliver health care. And they do this, and I think the reframe here is really important, especially for most of the folks that are on the call as learners, as research trainees, is that what we've been talking about today, which is super important, is around how do we get the knowledge that is produced from research to lead to meaningful change. Like the reframe I'm going to offer you, which relates to this, overlaps somewhat, is that you as a researcher with a skill set are a capability. You're a capability for an organization to be able to support evidence-informed decision making, which leads to improved service delivery, and better quality products and everything that the organization needs to do. So let me give you some examples because I think this is a little bit vague. But the point that I want you to have in the back of your mind is around what you bring, given your research training, to an organization, if you can embed there, as this really useful, capable human resource for supporting good decision making. So one of the problems we were facing in the paramedic service where I work in Peel region was occupational exposure to violence. Good research coming out of the United States, elsewhere, saying the paramedics, like other public safety personnel, are increasingly exposed to violence in the course of their duties. The challenge was not just for us, but for other services, other agencies, was going underreported. We didn't really even have a formal mechanism to track this until very recently. Usually, people would have to fill out a long and complex incident report or get a supervisor on the phone or talk to somebody in human resources that works normal business hours. But these folks, the public safety personnel, are working all hours of the day and night. And it created a lot of organizational barriers to filling out these incident reports. And how do you begin to solve a problem without tangible data on its prevalence, on what's causing it, right? So how do you begin to mitigate this risk without actionable intelligence? So the first step in this process, given this problem, was to say, okay, well, let's generate some trustworthy, high quality, robust evidence around what some of these barriers to reporting violence are. And many of them were surprising. A lot of them had to do, and you can link this still. It doesn't mean that just because the research is going to be very applied, that it should be devoid of theory. We did a social sciences qualitative study approach to identifying the features of organizational culture that normalize exposure to violence and stigmatize reporting. Great. We can take that information, that knowledge from the research process that's embedded through the organization, that's used co-construction throughout, and now we can make a new reporting tool, something that's going to try and overcome many of these barriers. And that's going to allow us to gather much better data. But we do this by engaging the paramedics, the people that are going to be filling out the violence reports, the leadership team, the people that are going to be responsible for actioning it, the human resources people that are going to be translating into existing bureaucracy, other stakeholders within the organization that are going to be working to develop mitigation strategies. What does everybody need to get out of this process in order to be able to meaningfully move the needle to actually start to mitigate this pressing occupational risk that we've identified? And so we developed this new reporting tool. We pilot test it, we implement it, it's live. And then the nice thing from a research perspective, again, embedding research throughout this entire process, is now we have tangible event level, really robust data from which we can do epidemiological research and fill gaps that were identified in the literature on this topic to begin with. Most of the time, when people were studying violence against paramedics, whether in Canada or elsewhere, they were relying on surveys. And they would ask people, over the last 6 months or a year, your career, have you experienced X, Y, and Z? Really valuable, draws attention to an issue, doesn't lend itself to mitigation because it's so far removed from the actual incident. But now we have this new reporting process embedded in routine documentation that's low friction, low barrier that people can fill out. And all of a sudden now we have really good epidemiological data from a research perspective, but we're also using that data, that dual use data, to be able to develop processes around mitigating this risk. So we can identify repeat perpetrators of violence, escalating patterns, try and identify features of 911 calls that are associated with an increased risk of violence, develop coordinated response plans, spin up interoperability working groups with our police partners. This data that we were able to pull from this new reporting process supported a business case for $1.5 million of out-of-budget cycle funding for high fidelity simulation-based training for every single paramedic. All our new recruits go through this. Every paramedic in the service has gone through this. And it's focused on identifying pre-assaultive cues, escalating behavior, and being able to disengage and safely extricate yourself from a potentially violent situation. And so what you see is as people realize that this new reporting process that they're filling out is generating data, the data are being used to meaningfully address the risk that they're talking about, we start to see when we circle back and survey our members again, which is another really important thing to do in this process, that we went from, I think it was less than 40% of our people on a survey indicated that they had reported violence that they've been subjected to more than doubled, north of 80%. And it's reflective of a new organizational culture. Anybody who works in an organization will tell you organizational culture is a really big wheel to turn. It's hard, it's heavy, it's hard to get going, it's hard to sustain. But we're through this research program, and not just how we think about the outputs of the research, but how we design the process, leveraging the capability that researchers bring to an organization to be able to move the needle and meaningfully address a pressing service priority, which in this case was occupational exposure to violence. One other example, something I think I'm really proud of this. I think it's really cool. Before COVID, we did a survey just in our paramedic service, screening our members for PTSD, depression, anxiety, burnout, a couple of other adverse health outcomes. And it was actually Sarah's idea that after the COVID, because it had been 5 years and one plague, it seemed reasonable to do this again. So we did, but we expanded it to multiple paramedic services. We engaged the leadership teams and the teams that are responsible for organizational health and safety and psychological health and safety in the development of the questionnaire we were going to use. Said, look, what are some of the concerns? Union said, we're really worried about alcohol intake. We see this reflected in some of the disputes that we're navigating with our members. Service, we say, we're really worried about sleep. Great. Okay, we're going to populate our questionnaire to be able to generate data on this. But the cool thing was bigger, multiple services, but we were able to work in this process for this study. The first time we did this, everybody filled out the survey anonymously. I didn't give us any identifying information, totally anonymous. This time around, we gave everybody a choice. We showed up at compulsory in-person continuing education sessions, handed out a pen and paper survey. We said, look, we know these are sensitive questions. It's up to you. You can participate or not. If you choose to participate, you can participate anonymously, or you can put your name and email address on the survey booklet. And our team's going to take a look at your data, and we're going to send you a confidential, personalized mental health report via email that breaks down your risk profile on each DSM-5 screen that we use in the study. And then we're also going to give you some personalized recommendations for care if your scores are in the hazardous range. And it was amazing to see that across multiple paramedic services, it's almost 60% of the paramedic they wanted to receive a report. I had no idea what to expect from this. Thought it would be a lot lower, but almost 60%, the majority. No differences between people who wanted a report versus didn't in terms of their symptom burden. So there was an effect driven by mental disorder symptoms. We were worried about that. A little bit less from leadership, not surprising, because of organizational stigma. And then after we sent everybody their report, a month or so later, we just sent them a short follow-up survey. And we said, okay, was the information that you got in the report, was it useful? Most said yes. How consistent with it, with how you felt about your mental health was it? And most said it was very consistent. And then we asked them, how many of you accessed the resources, the mental health resources that we included in the report? Only about 14%. And how many contacted a mental health professional because of the information that we sent in the report? And 15% said yes, but when we broke it down a little bit more, it was participants that screened positive for PTSD, depression, or anxiety were a lot more likely to indicate that they had contacted a mental health professional. We do an efficacy assessment on this, and we say as an indicator of clinical efficacy, we calculate a pseudo number needed to treat. So it worked out that for every 5 reports we sent to paramedics with symptoms of PTSD, depression, or anxiety, one of them actually took the step of contacting a mental health professional. So for some context on the number needed to treat, this is the part that really excites me. If you have a heart attack, after your heart attack, your recovery, you go to your family doctor says, okay, we're going to start you on aspirin, baby aspirin every day to help reduce the risk of a recurrent heart attack. The number needed to treat for that is 50. So we need to treat 50 patients who've had a heart attack with daily aspirin for 2 years to prevent one bad outcome. And our pseudo number needed to treat for this particular outcome was 5. And we bring this back to the paramedic service because the paramedic service and the union were sponsors of this research study. Embedded in the design of everything that we did, we say, here's some concept for mental health screening and how we can work that in to routine paramedic service operations to support the health of the service members. They also gave us some feedback. And so they said, I think this survey allowed people to be vulnerable and open. The survey and the subsequent feedback allowed us to look at areas that we may need to keep an eye on. Appreciate all your hard work. Suspected I could benefit from therapy. I have a provider, but haven't had a session in a while. I've since gone back for regular visits. Thank you for the report. It inspired me to pursue my mental health and well-being more seriously. Very useful information. I wish studies like this were more regularly conducted in our line of work, as the benefits are measurable. I know it's voluntary, but I think this would be a good screening tool for all employees to have. And so what I like about this is in terms of not just the knowledge that we're producing from a research study, but using research as a process to meaningfully advance and shape and respond to organizational pressures that are existing in the organization. And so if you, as a trainee, as somebody who are studying to become a researcher, I think a really great place for those that are inclined to land, if you can, is through embedded research roles in organizations where you can talk to the leadership of the organization and try and get them to see the value of the skills that you have in solving pressing problems that they're already dealing with. And I think you'll find that approach will help get you a lot of traction, and especially if you're able to pull in good teams and then find funding. Very often, if you're open to a bit of flexibility on what you're studying, it's easier to get institutional support if you're helping solve a problem that they already know about, rather than coming to the decision makers with a new problem they haven't considered, which is fun. Everybody likes that, to say, oh, I've got all these things in the background that are tugging my mind, but you haven't thought of this. So if you can align those things, I think that's great for the work you're doing. And I just put this up. This is if you want to be one of the apparently 10 people that might read a report in detail, feel free to pull that study. So thank you. I appreciate the invitation to chat.
Thank you very much, Justin, for speaking about how we can see impact and using the skills that researchers gain to, how did you frame it, sort of that as a process to respond to pressures within systems. And I think that's really interesting. And I like the idea of researchers being able to use the skills that they've developed and use those skills outside of the academic sphere to sort of consider impact. Fantastic presentations from all three of you. Thank you very much for your contributions to this morning. We have 4 minutes. So our chunk of time has shrunk to not be a chunk of time anymore. But really what Blair and I, when we first got together and planned this out, and then we met with our the people who had put their hands up to speak with us and to be the guest speakers and the experts for today's session, we essentially designed a week-long web workshop initially with all of the great ideas that got bounced around. And so we had to distill that down into an hour and a half. And thank you to both Kara and Kara, who provided some other resources where there's lots of opportunities out there for additional learning and training, and the different other workshops that are hosted, and there's opportunities for asynchronous learning, and then potentially institutions are hosting these sorts of opportunities as well. So we won't really have time to have a robust discussion, but maybe if anyone has any of our guest speakers has anything that they would like to sort of add as a parting 10-second little sentence around knowledge translation, knowledge mobilization, or any of those, then I'd be happy to have you speak up. No. Thank you, everyone. And that's fine. You can, if you have a word of wisdom you'd like to include, you can certainly add it into the chat. And thank you very much. But I would sort of leave us with a consideration. I want to first say thank you to CIMVHR and all of their support, especially Sarah Fee, who is the logistics assistance today. I know she's there in the background. Thank you very much. Thank you to CIPSRT and Kara Vincent, Atlas Institute, and Kara Kane, and Dr. Justin Maz, for agreeing to speak about, from your 3 different perspectives, very interesting and different perspectives about how we can mobilize knowledge, translate knowledge, consider our impacts in different ways. And I would also like to thank co-host Blair Maddock-Ferry and the SPEC community for deciding to host this session today. I would like to leave everybody sort of with this thought: what do we need to do, or do you need to do, to ensure you achieve your impact goals, and how will you navigate the pathways ahead? And we can think about certainly our, how do we bring together teams of people? How do we engage our knowledge users? What is the way to consider equity and aligning our research with various different goals? I love that idea of the 3 whats, and that's a great sort of a way to think about that. And then how will you use your skills in traditional or non-traditional ways so that you can create the impact that you're aiming to have? So thank you very much. One final plug for CIMVHR forums. April 14th timeline for submitting abstracts if you want to consider that avenue as a knowledge translation, knowledge mobilization opportunity. It is a fantastic event, having attended a couple times, and I want to thank everybody for joining us today. So that concludes our session. And I don't know if there's any questions logistically, but yeah, so thank you very much, and we'll see you at the next SPEC event.